Good evening, welcome to NTD UK News. I'm Stuart Leeson here, today's top stories. Voters head to the polls in what's seen as the biggest test of political opinion outside a general election. The meeting of G7 foreign ministers in London ends, and their communiqué focuses on China, Russia, and the pandemic. And last month's footfall in retail shops shows it's yet to reach pre-pandemic levels. Voters head to the polls as candidates battle for their seats across Britain. People in Scotland and Wales are voting for their parliament. Across the country, 13 mayoral elections are taking place, including one for the London mayor. It's the biggest test of political opinion outside of a general election. Here's NTD's Jane Worrell with the story.
The Prime Minister and his fiancée Carrie Symonds on the way to cast their vote on what's been dubbed as Super Thursday. The Labour leader and his wife Victoria also arriving at a polling station earlier. Thousands of candidates are racing for positions in England, Scotland and Wales. The outcome of the Scottish elections could decide the fate of the Scottish independence movement. There are 13 mayoral battles, including for the London mayor, as well as votes for police and crime commissioners in England and Wales. A House of Commons position is up for grabs in the northeastern constituency of Hartlepool. Some of the elections were delayed because of COVID-19 restrictions. These elections are the biggest test in political opinion since 2019. You might notice something a little different at the polling stations this year. People are encouraged to bring their own pen or pencil, wear a face mask and socially distance. Holyrood elections will be counted on Friday and Saturday. It could be Sunday before all local results in England are known. Jane Worrell, NTD News, London.
The UK and France have sent military vessels to Jersey in a dispute over fishing rights. French fishermen gathered their boats in protest today off the Channel Island. They're angry over restrictions on access to Jersey waters.
The UK sent 2 Navy ships to Jersey amid concerns over a blockade of the island. The Defence Ministry says their mission is a strictly precautionary measure. This amid an escalating row with France over post-Brexit fishing rights. About 50 French trawlers on Thursday sailed in a flotilla to the island and gathered off the Jersey port of St Helier. One organiser of the flotilla says this isn't an act of war, it's an act of protest. He says it's a peaceful way of voicing anger over reduced access to Jersey waters. One fisherman explained.
We're not happy with the licensing restrictions they handed out to us. We should have had licenses to fish as we wished, without any restrictions. Restrictions on the species, but they impose a restriction on days. Some boats will only be able to fish one type of fish when they used to fish 3 or 4.
France also sent 2 maritime patrol boats to Jersey. A Downing Street spokesman says any blockade would be completely unjustified and that Prime Minister Boris Johnson underlined his unwavering support for the island. On Wednesday, a French minister warned Paris could cut off electricity to the island. Jersey Minister of External Affairs Ian Gorst called those threats disproportionate. He says he is optimistic the issues can be resolved. The row began after the island issued new fishing permits in accordance with the post-Brexit trade deal. They included new conditions for licence holders. That angered French trawler crews and the French government, saying the new terms place unfair restrictions on French fishing vessels.
The G7 meeting in London has ended, with foreign ministers expressing deep concerns about human rights violations in Xinjiang and Tibet. The group of 7 nations ministers also took issue with Russia's behavior, calling it irresponsible and destabilizing.
Foreign ministers from the G7 group of countries have called on China to respect human rights and fundamental freedoms in a lengthy communiqué issued after the 2-day meeting. Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab and his counterparts from the US, Canada, Japan, France, Germany, Italy and the EU met in London with security challenges and the pandemic on the agenda.
And actually, if you want to stand up for human rights, we want to stand up for our democratic values, we've got to broaden the group of countries that are willing to stand up for those values. I think that's one thing we achieved for sure in the last couple of days.
Foreign ministers expressed their deep concerns about human rights violations in Xinjiang and Tibet, as well as the erosion of democracy in Hong Kong. They encouraged China to act responsibly in cyberspace and refrain from conducting or supporting cyber-enabled intellectual property theft.
We agreed a rapid rebuttal mechanism for international countries to push back on the pretty perverse fake news that has been going around about everything from vaccines to other countries.
They also committed to working with industry to expand the production of affordable vaccines.
That if we're going to solve what is clearly not just a global pandemic, but a global plan for recovery that we need to see ourselves through, not just the public health issues that are associated with it, but the economic challenges.
The foreign ministers expressed concerns about Russia's irresponsible and destabilizing behavior, including the build-up of Russian military forces on Ukraine's borders and in Crimea, instead calling for stable and predictable relations with Russia. This is the first face-to-face G7 foreign ministers meeting in 2 years. The G7 finance ministers will meet early next month, followed by the full summit of leaders in Cornwall a week later.
Retail stores in the UK are not seeing the return to in-person shopping they had hoped for. Footfall remains down at almost a third below pre-pandemic levels. The recent reopening of non-essential shops has failed to bring a rebound to the levels of shoppers seen in 2019. NTD's Neil Woodrow reports.
Compared to March, many of us last month walked through the doors of one of our favourite high street retailers as pandemic restrictions were lifted. But despite the April 12th reopening, figures show that overall we are still firmly below pre-pandemic shopping levels. Analysis by research firm Springboard revealed that retail store footfall in April was around 33% below levels seen in April 2019, with high street stores faring much worse than retail parks. High streets reported an almost 42% drop, while retail parks saw just a 7% fall. A marketing and insights director at Springboard said the results indicate significant pent-up consumer demand for bricks and mortar stores. The research firm says it anticipates that the gap between the level of footfall in 2019 and 2021 will narrow further with the opening of indoor hospitality from May 17th, and that other factors affecting this would include a return to office working and the growth in tourism in the UK. Online retail is still going strong after a slight drop earlier this year. It reached a new high in March, according to ONS data. Neil Woodrow, NTD News, Westminster, London.
The Telegraph reports that Britain is planning to stockpile metals used to make electric cars. It's due to concerns that China is aggressively cornering the market. NTD's Patrick Hayden has more on this.
The Telegraph reports the government is exploring creation of a national stockpile of metals and rare earth minerals. It says that the Department of Business wants to protect access to materials like lithium and cobalt. Those are essential for batteries used in electric cars. Fears are that China has a stranglehold on supplies. According to the report, Whitehall sources say Britain could stockpile and support attempts to create domestic mines. Lithium mining in Cornwall is one potential option. Britain could work more with private businesses abroad to secure supply as well. China currently processes about 35% of the global supply of nickel, 50% of lithium, 70% of cobalt, and 90% of rare earth minerals. Boris Johnson has vowed to ban production of petrol and diesel cars in 2030, but future standoffs with China could slow the transition away from fossil fuels. Patrick Hayden, NTD News, London.
Now, if you are using a router that is several years old, it could pose a security risk. New research finds that hackers could take control of your device thanks to security flaws and weak default passwords,
which warns millions of internet users could be vulnerable to hackers because they are using outdated routers. The consumer's watchdog tested 13 old routers and found 9 of them had security flaws. That means they are unlikely to meet the requirements proposed by the government in a new law. The lab test found 7 routers with weak default passwords. That means a cybercriminal could hack the router and access it from anywhere. The security tests also showed that 7 routers lacked firmware updates. These updates are vital for both security and performance, which also found that the EE Brightbox 2 has a local network vulnerability issue. This could give a hacker full control of the device, which estimates 7.5 million people could be affected by the risks. Among them, 6 million people could be using routers that have not been updated since 2018 or earlier. 4 old routers passed the security test and most of them are from BT. In response to the research, Virgin Media says it does not recognize or accept the findings and that 90% of its customers are using its latest router models. The BT Group, which also owns EE, says all of its routers are constantly monitored for possible security threats and updated when needed. TalkTalk says a very small proportion of the affected devices are being used by customers, and users can change their passwords easily at any time. Vodafone says it has stopped supplying a device named in the research nearly 2 years ago, and it will continue to receive updates as long as the device remains on an active customer subscription. The government is proposing to legally require manufacturers to tell customers for how long their device will receive updates and to ban easily guessable default passwords.
Greater London's Metropolitan Police say officers have seized hundreds of blades, as well as many other weapons in just 1 week. It's part of a crackdown on knife crime that involved over 3,000 weapon sweeps at bus and train stations.
Forces across England and Wales took part in a week of an anti-knife crime crackdown. That's amid concerns that violence could rise as lockdown measures are lifted. The Met Police seized over 400 blades of various kinds and over 150 other weapons, including machetes and Rambo-style knives. Police arrested almost 1,000 suspects and executed over 70 search warrants. They carried out over 3,000 weapons sweeps at bus and train stations using metal detectors and drug sniffer dogs. Officers also went into schools to speak to children about the dangers of carrying knives. Additionally, police seized 40 illegal guns in a crackdown on gun crime that was launched in London 8 weeks ago.
Now, if you are planning to have a drink or a meal outside a pub this weekend, here's some bad news for you. While it will get warmer, it is also expected to be wetter and windier. The Met Office says we can expect snow and hail showers on Friday. But temperatures will rise at the weekend when a cold air mass is pushed out of the way by a warmer system from the Atlantic. On Saturday, temperatures could potentially rise as high as 20 degrees in southeast England. But at the same time, the low pressure will also bring some wet and windy weather. Still to come, the EU and India are working on a global infrastructure scheme, challenging China's Belt and Road Initiative. Find out more about that when we return.